welcome. Thank you for listening wherever you might be, at whatever time this might be for you. I am Jeanette, Head of Sales and Communications at GrayMatter Leadership Coaching. And this actually happens to be the first pilot session that we're pulling together with our founder, BJ Gray, who happens to be on the call with me. And we decided to do this as actually more like a way for us to give back to our growing network and also to test out if we even like this kind of medium, this kind of communication. So because we know this is the first time, trust me, I will warn you, it's probably going to be very raw. It's not going to be perfectly edited out. It's just going to be two individuals who are passionate about leadership and growth and leading fulfilled lives, coming together and doing our best to give you value in the little time that we have. And before I bring out our founder, BJ Gray, let me start by thanking you for taking time to listen to this unpublished podcast, as I call it, because we're actually not going to publish it. We will only share it with our closed circle. So you're listening to this because you are actually a valued member of our growing network. And I'm so grateful that you've chosen to give us a chance to have this moment with you and possibly add some value to your day. Without further ado, I want to bring BJ forward and let her introduce today's concept, today's topic, which is going to lead into leadership and what we deal with here at GrayMatter Leadership Coaching. So, BJ, are you there?
Yes. Hi. Thanks, Jeanette, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. I really want to dig into this topic today around shame, which many of us don't even recognize it as a thing or something that we have, but it plays out in 9-10 different ways in our life and at work for many of us. And I want to bring some awareness around it because it is one of the biggest obstacles that will hold us back in reaching the goals or reaching our potential in our careers and as leaders. And so I would love just to kind of share some of my insights and ways that I think shame appears for us at work.
Wonderful. That sounds great. And like I said to everyone, this is obviously a pilot episode and it's what we're calling the Unpublished Podcast. So it is going to be raw. There's probably going to be some words that need editing that I probably will not edit out. So you are forewarned if you have sensitive ears. But I do hope that we'll bring some value to you in the next 15 minutes or so. So I love it. Let's jump into it. I don't like, wasting so much time ranting about things that don't really matter. How about I kick this off with a question that I want to pose to you first, because you come from a background that's, I personally consider very impressive. Now that you are both experienced as a corporate leader and as an entrepreneur, you first started working your way up the corporate ladder and you rose to the ranks of VP. You worked with huge companies like Victoria's Secret and Apple. So, I mean, there is no going around this. You have been able to pursue your dreams, create a lot of success, but I also know you've dealt with a lot of obstacles, and it's been challenging for you to go from the leader that you once were to the leader 2.0, as we like to talk about at GrayMatter. Why don't you start us off by sharing with us what your understanding of shame is as a leader and how it plays out, especially in the work setting?
Sure. Yeah. I really think that many of us don't realize when we're in our day-to-day lives at work, there's little habits that and little chatter that goes on in our head that is really tied to shame. And what that looks like is, sitting in a meeting in a big meeting where you're discussing the goals of the business or an opportunity the business is trying to tackle, and you're afraid to speak up. You're afraid to maybe throw your idea out there because you don't want to look dumb. You don't think you're smart enough.
Mm.
And that is a component of shame. You don't want to be judged by others. And we don't realize that this plays out with many of us in different forms, but when we don't really show up, we're not really being seen as good leaders. We're not being seen as leaders that contribute, that have an idea. And really, we're sitting on those ideas. We know we're smart. We know we have it, but we don't want to put it out there. We're afraid that the feeling of being rejected is what really comes up.
And I know you had your own experience with this, right? In fact, it's one of the things you, as you were recording for the podcast that you're doing soon, you did talk about an instance where you experienced this while working at Victoria's Secret. You want to share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was exactly that. I was the head of operations, and operations is always working on process improvement and connecting the dots when we could be more efficient at something, and connecting teams and making sure the communication was clear. And I would sit in these meetings with top leaders and know what I wanted to say or what I wanted to bring up that could help us get better, yet I would be too afraid to say it publicly in those meetings. And I used to meet with my boss, the COO, on the side, of course, each week, and I would share with him all my ideas in our private one-on-ones. And he would say, BJ, this is like one of my repeating things that I could improve on, was to speak out in the meetings, throw your idea out. Let's have some healthy conversation around your idea. Not here alone with me and think that I'm going to buy into this alone and support you. And, we did this dance several times for several months. And he said several times, if you don't start to speak up, you're not really showing your leadership courage. You're not really showing me that you have the ability to be a leader. And so that was when I really needed to dig into why was I really afraid to speak up? What was the underlying reason that was holding me back?
So good. And, for me, the key word there is your courage as a leader, which I guess is one of the reasons why we are so fascinated and that we encourage Brene Brown's book, because it kind of ties into the same concepts that we train on, we talk about at GrayMatter. So how would you, let's assume that I'm currently experiencing something similar to that. I'm, my career is actually going okay, and I'm pursuing my dreams, and this is starting to come up, but maybe I haven't yet prioritize it as something that I need to work on. If I'm listening to you right now and it hits me that, oh my God, I am struggling with that, what would be the next best steps for someone in such a position?
Well, it would be to really identify what is your symptom. Is it perfectionism? Is it hiding? Is it back channeling? And by back channeling, I mean, are you talking about a colleague instead of talking to them directly? So the first thing is finding out what your particular symptom is that you think might be, holding you back or getting in your way. And then we would talk about all the thoughts and beliefs you have that keeps you from, that makes you do those things. And we really need to dig into the root cause of where the shame or the fear of being judged comes from before we can transform your behavior. Like your behavior is stuck to a limiting belief or something that you have been on autopilot about all of your life, and we need to crack that code before you can transform and start behaving differently.
Right. So it doesn't really help to force something from the outside, is what you're saying.
No, you can change your action, but it really won't change that deep rooted piece of shame that's inside of you. So you really will still fall back into this habit, and you won't feel good about um, your next move. You'll take the action, and it'll be willed. It'll be through will and not through real belief. And I really think transformation has to start the courage has to come from believing something different and changing the old chatter in your head.
Is that why we call it Leadership 2.0?
Yes. Yeah. And as Brené Brown calls it, dare to lead. She really writes a book about this, that, having the courage to lead differently, with more awareness of yourself, with more empathy for others. And most of us, in our careers we were taught to be performers, to perform really well, to produce really good results, and to have productive teams. We weren't taught to look at ourselves and how we were showing up and feeling satisfied with what we were doing. We were just like, do good, you'll get ahead, perform hard, high performance, and you'll get ahead. But most of us don't always feel satisfied. We don't feel happy with what we're doing. And it's because we have our own things that we need to overcome to really hit that stride. And it takes courage to overcome those things.
Mm-hmm. I love it. So here's what I'm wondering. Given how fragile everything is in the season, we're like in a very trying season, very big demands on us, whether we are at that top leadership level or even at the bottom. I mean, regardless of where you're working right now, there's a lot of pressure to bring more to the table. How important is this topic right now?
I think it's pretty prevalent right now, because the way our world is with the pandemic and everybody having to take on a different routine for their life, they're not allowed to be on autopilot anymore and just run around and keep up and be busy and go to the office. They're having to face a lot of their own emotions and uncomfortable emotions. And I think this is like the beauty of right now, actually. If there's one thing that we're all being forced to do, is to look at ourselves and look at our own shortcomings, so that we can show up in the world differently, show up to our jobs differently. You have the time now, because you can't be on autopilot and buffer with just keeping busy, right? So I think it is really prevalent right now that people are seeing more of themselves, more of the things that make them uncomfortable, and it's the right time to face them. It's the right time to grow and change.
Yeah. Okay. So I would love to know, how do you actually go through, because if I've mastered enough courage to look at my shame and I realize, okay, I do need to work on this, because at some point it's going to start messing with my productivity. It's going to mess with my effectiveness. It's going to start spilling over into the people that I'm managing or the people that depend on me, and of course my company. Okay, is there something I can start doing before I even end up on a call with BJ, or taking one of BJ's programs? Is there a technique you could help us with? Is there something I could do right now?
Yeah, the first thing I would do is just put on a piece of paper, like do a brain dump of all the thoughts in your head when you think about that one thing that you don't feel you're enough of. If you're good enough, if you're smart enough, if you're thin enough, if you're rich enough, whatever it might be that you aren't enough of, or too much of. If you think you're too loud or too direct, or whatever those should haves or not enough ofs or too much ofs, whatever those are in your world, make a list of them and then write down every single thought that pops into your head about that shame, and start to look at those thoughts and start to look at what you really believe. And are those beliefs true? Is there another belief that will serve you? you have to like understand what's causing this before you can start to really step into being vulnerable. I have to teach you how to think about it before we can teach you how to act on it.
Beautiful. So I think, first of all, we need to make this a two-part thing because we still have so much ground to cover just around shame. That it would be great if we have a part two of shame, because what I'm realizing is there's different ways that shame could show up for me. On the one hand, it could be that it's affecting me in a way that things are just popping up for me, and I'm struggling to even use my voice to speak up, to as you gave the example, to share what matters to me, because I'm afraid of rejection and I'm afraid of judgment. So that's I would say a little bit easier to spot because it focuses more on the negative. But you and I have had this conversation where you made me aware that it can also show up in a different way, because, and I said this to you, being super feminine, I'm so aware of all the different ways that shame has come up for me and how I've had to deal with it and handle it and learn to release it in my life. But I always thought, well, I think mostly only women have shame, men not so much. And I mentioned this to you and you said, actually, that's not accurate. So if you don't mind, let's do a part two of shame. But this time, let's introduce the other aspect of how shame can show up when things are actually going well. And maybe you can then also give us some ideas on how we can handle it if that happens to be the case. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that sounds fabulous. We should definitely think about that. And I think another thing people might want to do is try to identify, to help them identify where shame might be showing up for them at work or in their life, is to take a look at one of my blogs where we talk about the 9 or 10 different ways shame shows up, whether it be perfectionism, comparison, back channeling, self-worth tied to productivity. I think there's a way people might identify more with their behavior than being able to name it. So if they need a little bit more help understanding shame and how it shows up for them, they might want to read that, and that will start to prompt some more thought process for them. But we should definitely talk about how shame is not really necessarily tied to a deficit, that it's also tied to when you do reach your goals and
to promotion.
And the promotion. So we definitely should have a conversation about that. And that's something I think that a lot of men do experience.
Wonderful. So yeah, I'm going to do that. I will make sure that not only do we circulate this, but we're also additionally going to provide that article. Maybe we can even convert it, repurpose it into some kind of PDF with the 10 that you mentioned, at least the 10 big ones. It could be more, but we can share that with our network for sure. That's a great idea. I actually love that. Why didn't I think of that before? Okay, so one last thing. I know we're going to be talking a lot about Dare to Lead, and we're going to discuss Brene Brown's book as well as 2 others. Still a secret. So we're going to open up our discussion very soon. But I would love you to leave us with a final thought, maybe inspired by that book, maybe inspired just by, your years of shifting from leadership 1.0 to leadership 2.0. And how did you actually do this? How did you manage to become objective enough, despite how busy you were, how demanding life was? And obviously there's also the idea that there were so many people looking up to you. Getting that courage, as you said, and as Brene likes to say, opening up to that level of vulnerability and introducing empathy in the workplace environment. Perhaps you could at least introduce us to how you started to make that transition.
I started by not bringing it back to me as much, not worrying so much about me and what I looked like to others, and was I failing, and comparing myself so much. I tried to like really work on dropping my ego, and it takes practice, and making it more about others so that I could be more vulnerable, so that I could be not constantly, in this state of self-reflection and worrying about myself. I started to worry more about others, and just show up with my own style and my own shortcomings if they were there, if people even notice them. You think that everybody's watching every ounce of your every move, and sometimes they're not. We're all so worried about ourselves. I don't think we have enough time so much to worry about each other. And when I got that into my head, that maybe it's not about me, it's about them, I was able to start to drop the ego. And this is what one of my male clients just said to me recently. He said, I looked at the numbers of people that showed up to my meeting, and I realized, what did I do wrong that not enough people came? And I thought, well, and I said to him right away, well, maybe it wasn't about you. Maybe they were busy. Maybe it's, like, what if it wasn't about you and what you could have done differently? What if you did exactly what you were supposed to do and they just didn't show up? Why are you making it mean something about you? And when I took that same approach to everything I did, stopped worrying and hiding because I was so afraid of what it might look like, I started slowly dropping my ego and turning it around to be more about them and just showing up.
And this is what you call the outward mindset.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
This is what we embody at GrayMatter Coaching.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. BJ Gray, thank you so much. This has been incredible. Are we going to do this again?
Yes.
It was fun, right?
Yes, I love it.
Loved it. And thank you so much for each and every person that took the time to listen to us. If you did like this, please drop us an email, reply, or say something. Let us know that this was of value to you and that you want us to keep producing Unpublished Podcast. Yes, I think I'm going to make that into like the actual name. It just sounds so good.
Okay.
So until our next conversation, bye everyone.
Bye-bye.